All right, let's dive in. We're taking a deep dive today into the world of catfishing, looking at how to recognize those red flags that might just save you from a whole lot of heartache. And who knows, maybe you're out there prepping for an online date tonight. If so, this is definitely the deep dive for you.
Definitely some good advice coming up.
So, first things first, what exactly is catfishing?
Well, it's basically when someone creates a totally fake online persona, to try and trick other people. And we're not just talking about, like, using a filter on your profile pic. It's way more than that. It's like creating a whole new identity,
Mm.
a fictional character
Yeah.
built to lure someone in.
Right. So it's all about the intent to deceive. And that makes you wonder, why would someone go to all that trouble? I mean, what's the point?
Well, the reasons can be pretty varied, actually. Sometimes it's tied to, like, deep insecurities,
Hmm.
a desire to escape reality, maybe, or a need for validation that they're not getting in their real life.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like, especially with social media these days, there's so much emphasis on like appearances and perfect lives and all
Oh,
that.
absolutely. The internet can be like a breeding ground for comparison and self-doubt.
Yeah.
And so people might turn to catfishing to, like, create this idealized version of themselves, the person they think everyone wants them to be.
Yeah. Like they're trying to live out a fantasy, both for themselves and the person they're catfishing. But then there's the darker side of things, right? Like the more malicious intentions.
Oh, definitely. Sometimes catfishing can be a way to, like, get revenge or to harass someone or even to exploit them, financially or emotionally.
Wow, that's pretty scary. So understanding the motives behind it all, that's a good first step in recognizing like potential catfishing situations. But let's get practical here. How do we actually spot a catfish out in the wild? This article we're looking at today, it's got some pretty interesting red flags listed. One that really jumped out at me was that whole avoiding face reveals thing.
Yeah, that's a classic catfish move. If someone's always dodging video calls or coming up with all these crazy excuses why they can't show their face, that's a big red flag right there.
Makes you wonder, right?
Like a genuine person who's actually interested in getting to know you, they wouldn't have a problem with a video chat.
Exactly. Seems pretty simple, doesn't it? What about the candid selfie test? That one sounds kind of fun.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Like, just casually ask them for a spontaneous pic,
Yeah.
something beyond their, perfectly curated profile photos. Chances are a real catfish, they'll have a very limited supply of stolen photos to work with, and they'll probably struggle to give you, those genuine in-the-moment pics.
Makes sense. So we've got limited photos, dodging video calls, anything else we should be on the lookout for?
Hmm. Let me think. Oh, this one's a biggie. Look out for what we call a scanty online presence. And I don't just mean having a small number of friends. It's more about, like, a lack of real engagement, real interaction online.
Ah, so it's not about quantity, it's about quality.
Exactly. Like a catfish might have a few friends, but those accounts could be fake or inactive. What you want to look at is the depth of their online interactions.
Yeah.
Do they seem to have real relationships, shared experiences, genuine conversations? If not, that's a major red flag.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to build a house on like a foundation of sand. No real substance there. And speaking of things lacking substance, the article also talks about the danger of too good to be true stories. Like those masterfully crafted narratives designed to, well, to reel you in.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Remember that example in the article about the catfish claiming his company was opening a new office in the listener's small town, just to be near them?
Yeah, that's wild. It's amazing how they can tailor their stories to appeal to like our desires and vulnerabilities, like they prey on our hopes and dreams
Mhm.
and create these elaborate fantasies that are almost impossible to resist.
Exactly. They play on our emotions, which can make it way harder to think straight and be objective.
It's like they're casting some kind of spell. Which brings us to a very serious red flag. The one that sends shivers down my spine. The money trap.
Uh-oh. Yeah, this is where catfishing can get really dangerous with real-world consequences. It might start with, like, a sob story, claiming they desperately need financial help because of a family emergency, a medical crisis, or some other terrible event.
Ah, I can see how people would fall for that.
Or they might spin some elaborate scheme, promising, like, investment opportunities or business ventures, which are, of course, totally bogus.
Right. So important to remember, never ever send money to someone you've only met online. Doesn't matter how convincing their story is, it's just not worth the risk. And speaking of things that should set off those alarm bells in your head, what about the instant romance overload red flag?
Oh, yeah, that whirlwind romance that feels like it's straight out of a movie. That's where the love bombing tactic comes in.
I was actually reading about that. It's like they shower you with all this affection, compliments, declarations of love, all to try and like overwhelm you and cloud your judgment.
Yeah, exactly. They want to sweep you off your feet emotionally so you're less likely to notice any inconsistencies in their story or even question their motives. It's a really manipulative tactic designed to create a super intense connection really fast, which then makes it harder to break away even if you start having doubts.
Right. So we've got a pretty good grasp now of those red flags to watch out for. But what happens if you think you're already in a situation with a potential catfish? What do you do then?
That's a great question. And luckily, the article has some solid advice on that front, too.
Perfect. Let's dive into that right after this short break.
So you think you might be tangled up with a catfish, huh? Well, the first thing you got to do is take a deep breath. Try to approach the whole thing with a clear head. Because it's so easy to get caught up in all the emotions you know, especially if you've invested a lot of time and energy into this relationship.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's like our emotions can totally cloud our judgment sometimes. So where do we go from there? What's step one?
Well, the article suggests channeling your inner Sherlock Holmes. Do a little DIY research. Think of it as gathering evidence.
Ooh, I love a good mystery. So what kind of detective work are we talking about here?
Start with a reverse image search. See if those photos pop up on any other profiles or websites. You can even search their messages online. If they're using the same lines on multiple people, well, that's a pretty big red flag right there.
It's amazing what you can find with just a little online sleuthing. Any other investigative tools we can use?
Let's see, if you have their phone number, try searching that online. You'd be surprised how much information can be tied to a simple phone number. And listen while you're busy playing detective. Don't forget to prioritize your own safety.
Right, safety first. Well, what do you mean by that?
Information lockdown is crucial. Be super careful about sharing any personal or financial info with someone you haven't met in person. Think about it. You wouldn't give a stranger the keys to your house, right?
Definitely not. So basically, treat your personal information with the same level of security as your physical safety.
Yeah.
Makes sense. But what if you've already shared some information? What then?
Well, if you already shared something sensitive, it's important to take steps to, minimize the potential damage, change your passwords, monitor your bank accounts,
Yeah.
and just be aware of any unusual activity.
Damage control. Got it. So we've covered the online sleuthing, the information lockdown. What else can we do to, like, expose a catfish? What are some other tactics?
Well, there's this one technique that I find pretty clever. It's called knowledge-based interrogation. That
Ah,
sounds intense, right?
yeah, kind of. What is that exactly?
Basically, think of it as a pop quiz for your suspected catfish. Come up with some very specific questions about their supposed background or experiences. Stuff that only someone who's genuinely lived that life would know.
So you're trying to catch them in their own web of lies.
Exactly. For example, if they claim to be a graduate of a certain university, ask them about a specific professor, a campus landmark, or even like a memorable event that happened during their time there.
Yeah.
If their answers are vague or inconsistent, or just plain wrong, well, then you've got your answer.
It's like those detective shows where they trip up the suspect with a seemingly innocent question. But what if, even after all this detective work, you're still not sure? What then?
Well, sometimes, despite our best efforts, the truth can be hard to find. In those cases, it might be time to call in the professionals.
You mean like a real-life private investigator?
Yep. If you've been talking to this person online for a long time, you've gotten emotionally invested, and you're really struggling to figure out the truth, hiring a private investigator might be the best way to go. They have the experience, the resources, and the know-how to dig deeper, and they can often get to the bottom of things a lot more effectively than we can on our own.
It's like having your own personal Sherlock Holmes on the case. And I imagine there's no shame in seeking professional help with something like this.
None at all. Your safety and well-being are what matters most. And sometimes getting professional support is the smartest and the bravest thing you can do.
I agree. So we've talked about how to spot a catfish, how to protect ourselves, but let's zoom out for a second. What does the prevalence of catfishing tell us about our society, about our relationship with the internet, about our own human nature?
Now, that's a really insightful question.
Yeah.
It's something the sociologists and psychologists have been wrapping their heads around for years.
It seems like the internet has, like, fundamentally changed how we interact with each other, how we connect.
It's true. It's created this massive, often anonymous space where it's way easier to present a carefully curated version of ourselves,
Hmm.
to hide behind these like perfectly constructed facades.
It's almost like we're all performing online, crafting these digital personas that might not reflect who we really are in real life.
That's a great way to put it. And that disconnect between our online and offline selves, well, that can create a perfect environment for deception and manipulation to thrive.
It makes you wonder if this whole catfishing thing is a symptom of something deeper, like a growing sense of isolation, a need for connection in an increasingly digital world.
I think there's definitely a connection there. The funny thing is, while the internet has connected us in ways we never thought possible, it's also in some ways made those feelings of loneliness and isolation even worse. We're constantly bombarded with images of seemingly perfect lives, curated profiles, idealized versions of reality. So no wonder some people feel like they have to create these fake personas just to fit in or to feel like they deserve attention.
It's definitely a complex issue with no easy answers, but it's definitely something worth thinking about. How has the internet changed our ideas about trust and identity? How do we navigate this digital world while staying true to ourselves and protecting our hearts?
Those are the million-dollar questions. And I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer. But one thing's for sure, we need to be having these conversations, raising awareness, encouraging critical thinking about our online interactions.
Absolutely. We need to be more mindful of the information we're taking and the connections we're making and the boundaries we're setting. We need to have healthy skepticism without becoming cynical and embrace authenticity without sacrificing our privacy.
And maybe most importantly, we need to remember that genuine connection, true intimacy, that thrives on honesty and vulnerability. It's about embracing our imperfections, sharing our true selves, and building relationships based on trust and mutual respect.
That's such a good point. It's a powerful reminder that real connection goes beyond the filters and the facades of the digital world. It's about finding those people who see us, accept us, and love us for who we truly are, both online and offline.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And while the internet can be this breeding ground for deception, it can also be an amazing tool for building those meaningful connections. It's all about using it wisely, discerningly, and with a healthy dose of self-awareness.
I love that. Using the internet wisely, discerningly, and with a healthy dose of self-awareness, words to live by. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the psychology behind catfishing to the practical steps you can take to protect yourself. We've looked at the warning signs, the detective work, and the bigger societal implications of this whole phenomenon.
And hopefully you, our dear listener, are walking away with a deeper understanding of catfishing, its motivations, and how it impacts our digital lives.
But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought. We've talked a lot about how to spot a catfish, but what about the catfish themselves? What drives them to create these elaborate facades? What are their vulnerabilities? What are their unmet needs?
That's a really profound question.
Yeah.
And it's one that deserves a whole deep dive of its own. It really does. It's easy to, to demonize catfish, to see them as the bad guys. But we got to remember that they're humans too,
Yeah.
with their own, complicated stories and reasons for doing what they do.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the deception and forget that there's an actual person behind the mask, someone who might be, hurting or dealing with their own issues.
Exactly. And maybe if we can try to understand their struggles, what they're going through, then we can start to address the root causes of this whole catfishing thing and hopefully create a more, compassionate and empathetic online world.
Right. Instead of just asking, how do we catch them, we should also be asking, why are they doing this?
Yeah, exactly. It's about shifting our perspective, right, from judgment to understanding. And that doesn't mean we condone their actions, of course, but it does mean recognizing that there's often, like, a deeper story behind the facade.
I agree. It's a tough goal, but it's a worthy one. To try and approach this whole thing with more empathy, to try and build a more authentic and compassionate online world.
It all starts with recognizing that we all have those same basic needs, right? Connection, validation, a sense of belonging. And sometimes, in the vastness of the internet, those needs can get, like, twisted or misdirected.
It's funny. While we've been talking about catfishing, I've been thinking about how, we all present ourselves online, even when we're not intentionally trying to deceive anyone. We choose our best photos, we highlight our achievements. We might even tweak our bios a bit to make ourselves sound, more interesting.
Oh, absolutely. We all do it to some extent. It's like we're curating our own digital personas, which, might not always match up perfectly with the messy reality of our offline lives.
It's like we're all playing a role, performing for this invisible audience.
And the funny thing is, this whole idea of online self-presentation isn't really new. you know? Even before the internet, people were managing their impressions, choosing their words carefully, putting their best foot forward in social settings.
It's human nature, right,
Hmm.
to want to show our best side.
But the internet has, like, amplified this whole thing. It's created a global stage where we're constantly aware of being watched,
Yeah.
of being judged, compared. And for some people, that pressure can be, well, it can be a lot to handle.
So in a way, catfishing is just like the extreme version of something we all do to some degree. It's like taking that online self-curation and pushing it way too far, crossing that line from embellishment to straight up deception.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. It's like a spectrum, right?
Yeah.
And figuring out where that line is between acceptable self-presentation and harmful deception. Well, that's a tricky question.
Makes you wonder if this whole catfishing phenomenon is forcing us to like reevaluate our relationship with authenticity, both online and offline. Are we so focused on presenting this perfect version of ourselves that we're losing sight of, the beauty in our imperfections?
That's a big question, and I think it's really important to remember that true connection. It comes from being vulnerable, from being authentic. It's okay to let our guard down a bit, to show our flaws, to just be real, even in the digital world.
Yeah, that's so important, especially in a world that's constantly telling us to be perfect.
We need to be more mindful, you know, about how we use the internet, how we present ourselves, how we connect with others. It's about finding that balance between curating our online image
Hmm.
and staying true to who we are, between protecting ourselves and being open to vulnerability.
It's a journey for sure, and one that we're all on together. Well, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into the world of catfishing.
It's been a really fascinating conversation.
We've explored the why, the how, the what to do about it, and even touched on some of the bigger questions this whole thing raises about our society and, ourselves.
I think we all learned a lot today.
Definitely. And for you listening out there, remember, knowledge is power. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and most importantly, stay safe out there in the digital world. Until next time.